When Dave Thomas launched Wendy's in 1969, critics told him America didn't need another fast food restaurant. In fact, Burger King had commissioned an expensive study that predicted Wendy's high burger prices would soon bankrupt them. 55 years later, that same restaurant has grown to more than 7,000 locations across 30 countries, generating $14.5 billion in system-wide sales. Considering Wendy's massive success today, it's hard to believe it was founded by a shy kid who was abandoned by his mother, dropped out of school, and struggled to hold down a job. The only thing he did hold on to was his dream, to open his own restaurant. This is the story of how Dave Thomas, who with just $40 in his pocket, built a multi-billion-dollar burger empire long after McDonald's and Burger King had already expanded. Dave Thomas was born on July 2, 1932 in Atlantic City, New Jersey. His mother was young, unmarried, and unprepared to raise a child. Just 6 weeks after his birth, she took him to an adoption agency and never looked back. 6 months later, Dave was placed in the care of Rex and Auleva Thomas, who kept his adoption a secret. Still, he never got the chance to experience what it was like to grow up in a real family. When Dave was 5 years old, Auleva died of rheumatic fever, leaving him in the care of his short-tempered adoptive father. While Rex was a hard-working man, he never had the time or the inclination to be a present father. He struggled to find work and moved from one state to another with Dave, barely able to afford dirty boarding houses and cramped trailers. Shortly after, his father remarried. Unfortunately, Dave's new stepmother was incredibly mean and controlling. She constantly picked fights with him, and to make matters worse, his dad often took her side. This made Dave feel extremely lonely at home, causing him to become quieter and shyer throughout his childhood. A few years later, his father's marriage fell apart, forcing Dave to move once again. Their new apartment was worse than the last. It was smaller, inconvenient, and didn't even have a kitchen, which meant Dave and his father often had to go out to eat. However, eating at restaurants quickly became Dave's favorite part of the day, since it was the only time he spent with his dad and he could order his favorite food, hamburgers. Sitting in those diners, he'd watch other families enjoy their meals, wipe their children's faces, and laugh together. Soon, Dave was hit with an epiphany. Restaurants weren't just about juicy hamburgers or quick meals. They were places where people felt safe and spent quality time with their friends and family. And for a boy like Dave, that meant everything. And so, at just 8 years old, he'd already made up his mind. One day, he'd open his own restaurant, a place where everyone felt the same comfort he longed for. Little did he know, that decision would lead to one of the biggest restaurant chains in the entire world. Since home was never a pleasant place to be, Dave decided to find work, starting at just 10 years old. He lied about his age and applied to every restaurant he could find, but he was ultimately rejected every single time. So, he took several odd jobs that he never really liked or kept for long, including working at a gas station, grocery store, bowling alley, and delivering newspapers. One day, he got fired from a new job at Walgreens after they discovered he was only 12. Not long after, he finally landed his dream job at the Regis restaurant in Knoxville, Tennessee. Dave absorbed everything that he could about the business, learning the rhythm of the kitchen, the standards of service, and the pride that came from preparing a well-cooked meal. But just as he found stability in his job, the Thomas family had to move again, this time to Fort Wayne, Indiana. By then, Dave was 14 years old and had developed an incredible work ethic, so it was no surprise that he was quickly hired at the Hobby Ranch House, a popular restaurant in Fort Wayne. There, he met a man who would change his life, Phil Claus, the owner of the place. Even in a suit, he'd sweep the floors and wash the dishes without complaint. He was not only a hard worker, but kind and humble. Dave admired him instantly, and it motivated him to push even harder. And by the end of the school year, he was offered more hours, a raise, and, most importantly to Dave, a spot in the kitchen. For the first time in his life, Dave was proud of himself. Suddenly, his father announced that they were moving again, But this time, Dave had no intention of leaving. The hobby house had become more than just a job. It was his family now. With his father gone, 15-year-old Dave was now living alone with no family or friends. He worked 50 hours per week at the hobby house, squeezing his schoolwork in at night. But by the end of 10th grade, he'd had enough. The classroom didn't feel relevant anymore. Everything he wanted to learn was happening in the kitchen, so he dropped out. But suddenly, in 1950, the Korean War broke out, and Dave, knowing the draft was coming, decided to enlist early. Curious to learn how the military operated its version of a restaurant, he volunteered to work in the mess hall. His boldness caught the attention of his superior, who promoted him to staff sergeant at just 18 years old. Stationed in Frankfurt, Germany, Dave worked long hours cooking for thousands of soldiers with little to no breaks, gaining invaluable skills in feeding large numbers of people. By the time of his discharge and return to the hobby ranch house in 1953, he wasn't just a line cook anymore. He'd become a leader and a problem solver. Over the years, he worked his way up to being manager and soon married a young waitress from the restaurant, Lorraine Buskirk. By 1956, the couple already had 2 children, Pam and Kenny. But with a growing family, Dave needed more than his salary of $75 a week. Unfortunately, the hobby house wasn't making enough money. Phil and Dave experimented with new menu items, like adding barbecue, but they still couldn't find the winning formula. Then, one night, in a hotel lobby, Phil introduced Dave to a man who could change everything. That man was the founder of KFC, Colonel Harlan Sanders. In 1955, 65-year-old Harlan Sanders was hitting the road, offering his Kentucky Fried Chicken to restaurants. For each chicken sold, he would receive a 5-cent commission. His secret recipe, pressure-fried chicken seasoned with 11 herbs and spices, created a taste so distinct that customers kept coming back for more. Sanders knew he had something special, and he was on a mission to franchise it across the United States. But he also knew the risks. One bad franchise, one dip in quality, and that's all it would take to destroy his brand. So he needed people he could trust. The hobby house had a big reputation in Fort Wayne, so Sanders reached out to Dave's boss, asking if he'd be interested in selling KFC at the hobby house. Struggling to improve sales, Phil signed the deal. After 3 months of learning the Colonel's cooking techniques and perfecting his signature gravy, Phil and Dave introduced KFC to the hobby house, and from the first day, sales took off. People were hooked on Harlan's fried chicken and would wait in long lines that ran out the door. In fact, the hobby house was constantly packed to the point that it actually became a problem. But then, Dave saw an opportunity that the others didn't. Noticing that people were traveling more and taking their food to go, he made a bold move by building a small space exclusively for takeout chicken orders. By doing this, he and Phil helped pioneer one of the first dedicated carryout sections in the restaurant industry. It was a simple idea, but it changed everything. Within a few months, the carryout section was pulling in $3,000 to $4,000 on Sundays alone. By 1959, KFC was expanding rapidly, and Phil Claus had partnered to open 4 more hobby house locations serving KFC in Columbus, Ohio. However, they were being mismanaged and failing so badly that Sanders wanted to shut them down. Phil, who was now $250,000 in debt, turned to Dave and made him an eye-watering deal. If you can save them, you'll get 40% ownership for just $65. By then, Dave had 4 kids and a stable job. Leaving everything behind to save 4 broken restaurants just sounded, well, reckless. But Dave trusted his gut, believing that this was his chance to finally become a restaurant owner. And so, in January 1962, with just $40 in his pocket, he left behind his family for Columbus, Ohio. Everyone, including Colonel Sanders, told him he was making a mistake. But little did they know that Dave had just signed on to one of the best deals in restaurant history. When Dave arrived in Columbus, he immediately got to work. He fired all the managers, rebranded the location as Colonel Sanders Kentucky Fried Chicken, slashed the menu, tightening the frying method, and since there was no money for advertising, he traded chicken for radio ads and came up with the idea of the KFC revolving bucket sign at each store to grab attention. His strategies worked, and within 6 months, their sales exploded. By 1968, KFC was buying back franchises, and Dave sold his shares in the company, totaling over $1.5 million. In just a few years, he had gone from having $40 in his pocket to becoming a millionaire. For many people, this would have been enough. But for Dave, his success in Columbus merely laid the foundation for his next big idea. At age 35, Dave Thomas had achieved what most people could only dream of: becoming a self-made millionaire. But after selling off his KFC franchises, he hit an unexpected wall. He became extremely bored. Fearing he might one day struggle again, he accepted a generous job managing a seafood franchise called Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips, earning $20,000 a year. Still, Dave wasn't satisfied. He had spent years rescuing failing restaurants, making risky deals, and beating the odds. And now, he was just managing a franchise he had little interest in. His only real excitement came during conversations with his close friend, Len Imke, owner of a Buick dealership in Columbus, Ohio. Dave would light up as he shared his dream of opening his own burger restaurant one day, describing how his hamburgers would be prepared. Fresh, simple, and made with care, just like the old days. Len had recently purchased a building that used to be a steakhouse, and he was using part of that space for prepping new Buicks for a showroom down the street, but the lounge and dining area sat empty. So he offered the space to Dave for just $250 a month. Dave didn't have to think twice. He shook hands with his friend and sealed the deal. On his way home, he eagerly began thinking about a name for his new restaurant. He wanted it to be a family business, something personal, so he thought about his children, especially his 8-year-old daughter, Melinda Lou. Her siblings had struggled to pronounce her name as a child, so they simply called her Wenda. Dave pictured her red hair, freckled cheeks, and warm smile and immediately knew she was the perfect face for a family-friendly restaurant. He only tweaked her nickname from Wenda to Wendy, and with that, Wendy's old-fashioned hamburgers was born. Dave had learned from Colonel Sanders that presentation mattered. While chains like McDonald's leaned into sleek, modern designs, Dave wanted Wendy's to resemble the warm, pre-World War II diner atmosphere that he missed from his childhood. So he transformed the dining room, swapping out tile floors for carpeting, replacing fluorescent lights with Tiffany-style lamps, and adding bentwood chairs and vintage poster ads to give the space nostalgic charm. As for the food, Dave focused on quality, fresh ingredients, and 100% pure beef. No gimmicks, no frozen patties, just customizable burgers made to order. His hamburger patties would also be square, deliberately hanging over the edges of the buns to show how big they were. Unlike other chains, Dave kept the menu simple. A single burger would go for 55 cents, a double for 95 cents, and a triple for $1.35, accompanied by fries, chili, Frosties, and drinks. Of course, many people call him crazy. Serious business people saw the fast food market as oversaturated, and his burger prices, nearly 3 times higher than McDonald's, were expected to scare customers away. But Dave didn't base his restaurant on fancy market research. He followed his gut. He believed there were people like him willing to pay a little more for better quality hamburgers. And so, on November 15th, 1969, Dave opened the very first Wendy's in Columbus, Ohio. What he didn't expect, however, was that his restaurant would quickly grow far beyond what he'd ever imagined. When Dave founded Wendy's, he wasn't dreaming of a burger empire. He simply wanted to build one successful restaurant, enough to pay for his kids' education and put food on the table. But when opening day arrived, he was shocked to see a long line of people stretched outside the door. Locals had gathered to see what this new burger joint was all about. Even the city dignitaries and the mayor showed up. At that moment, Dave realized he had created something special. Wendy's instantly became a hit. People loved the burgers and appreciated what the brand stood for. Fresh, high-quality food made the old-fashioned way. The restaurant was generating so much revenue that within 6 weeks of opening, it was already turning a profit. Encouraged by the strong start, David decided to open a second location the following year, curious to see if the success of the first was just a fluke. But just as he had pioneered carryout at the Hobby House, Dave decided to experiment again, this time with a drive-through pickup window on the side of the restaurant. After some trial and error, and his customers slowly getting used to the idea, it quickly became a game changer. Week after week, long lines of cars stretched down the block, doubling Wendy's sales. This was a massive breakthrough in the food industry, as Wendy's became one of the first chains to make the drive-thru concept a huge success, at a time before even McDonald's or Burger King had hopped on the drive-thru bandwagon. At the time, only In-N-Out and Jack in the Box had drive-thrus, but their locations were still few in number and mostly limited to the West Coast. After opening 2 more successful stores, Dave finally decided to present Wendy's to the nation. With McDonald's and Burger King already enjoying a 20-year head start, he knew he had to expand quickly if he had any hope of catching up. So, in 1973, Dave began franchising the Wendy's brand. But instead of selling individual units, he came up with the idea of licensing entire cities or regions, a unique strategy that, combined with the company going public in 1975, allowed Wendy's to scale at lightning speed. In 1973, Wendy's had just 4 restaurants, but by 1978, that number had exploded to 1,000. And a year and a half later, Wendy's opened another 1,000 stores, making it the fastest growing fast food chain in America. With rapid expansion and soaring revenue, Wendy's broke records, becoming the first restaurant to surpass $1 billion in annual sales within its first 10 years. The company continued to innovate, introducing a salad bar in 1979 and the baked potato in 1984, the first burger chain to cater to a growing base of health-conscious consumers. But perhaps the company's biggest moment of brand awareness came with the launch of its wildly popular ad campaign,
"Where's the beef?"
Highlighting the size of Wendy's burger patties compared to competitors, the quirky, sarcastic commercial resonated with millions. So much so that Wendy's revenue jumped 30% in a single year. By then, Wendy's had become the 3rd largest hamburger chain in the world, behind only Burger King and McDonald's. By his early 50s, Dave had become extremely wealthy. After decades of hard work and sacrifice, he stepped away from the day-to-day operations in 1982 and bought a massive waterfront mansion in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where he spent his days golfing, riding his yacht, and making up for the lost time with his family. However, his time off wouldn't last long. While the company had experienced a boom in popularity during the early 1980s, it soon struggled to meet expectations and failed to capitalize on its momentum. The truth was, Wendy's was no longer Dave's old-fashioned family restaurant. It had become a publicly traded company that increasingly seemed to value its shareholders more than its consumers. And if something wasn't done soon, everything that Dave had worked so hard for was going to crumble just as quickly as it had risen. After Dave stepped down from the company in 1982, Wendy's new leadership failed to keep the brand on the right path. Quality control had suffered from the rapid expansion, and a shift in branding and franchising strategy, combined with a failed attempt to launch a breakfast service, led to declining sales, store closures, and a dip in franchise growth. By December of 1985, nearly 20% of Wendy's stores were teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. But what people forgot was that Wendy's had a built-in advantage. Out of everyone who stood at the top of a major food company, Dave Thomas was the only one who had actually stood at the grill and flipped the burgers himself. And he never forgot the core principles of a successful restaurant: quality, service, and cleanliness. To help restore that foundation, Dave tapped his friend and one of Wendy's most successful franchisees, Jim Neer, to run the company as president in 1986. Jim Neer had spent his entire life in the restaurant industry, starting as a short-order cook at White Castle at just 15 years old, before running a hamburger chain with 50 locations and later owning multiple Wendy's franchises. After taking control of Wendy's, Jim Neer immediately refocused the company's efforts on operations. He reworked the menu by adding a skinless chicken breast sandwich, a bigger and better salad bar buffet, and, most importantly, he pioneered a value menu in 1989, a selection of items priced at 99 cents every day. The Wendy's Super Value menu proved so successful that sales jumped 25% that same year. The concept was later copied by McDonald's, Burger King, and every other major fast food chain, becoming a permanent fixture of the industry. However, Jim Neer's most brilliant move was convincing Dave Thomas to return to the company as the face of Wendy's new advertising campaign. While McDonald's and Burger King focused their marketing on flashy entertainment to lure children, Wendy's leaned into what really mattered: the food. Dave proudly stood behind his never-frozen burgers and commercials, emphasizing their quality with his simple, down-to-earth personality. His relatable tone resonated with millions of viewers across the country. The campaign was a success, and Dave appeared in over 800 commercials for the company, more than any other individual in advertising history. In just a few years, the Wendy's company went from losing nearly $5 million in 1989 to reporting $78 million in total earnings by 1993, while its customer satisfaction ranking climbed to the top of the industry. Jim Neer and Dave Thomas had just pulled off one of the greatest turnarounds in fast food history. But beyond business, Dave also felt deeply committed to giving back.
I was adopted, and I really believe that every boy and every girl deserves a permanent, loving home.
He dedicated his later years to helping others in similar situations and founded the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption in 1992, an organization focused on finding permanent homes for children in foster care. On January 8, 2002, Dave passed away from liver cancer at the age of 69. After his death, Wendy's continued to grow and expand around the globe. Today, the company remains the third largest hamburger chain in the world, operating more than 7,000 locations in over 30 countries and generating over $14.5 billion in system-wide sales. And it all started with a shy, adopted kid whose only dream was to, one day, open his own restaurant. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.